Good afternoon and welcome to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station, 98.1 FM and AM 1220. I am your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook, the pastor of the Freedom's Way Baptist Church right here in the beautiful Santa Clarita Valley. We are glad that you're joining us today. If this is your first time, thank you very much. If you are a faithful listener, we're so gracious that you are tuning in today. Just a couple of quick shameless plugs. This coming Sunday, if I could just say, we have an event that the Santa Clarita Freedom Fighters are putting together. That will be at 2 o'clock at Central Park, and I believe it'll be about an hour event or so. I just got the role or roster of people that are going to be speaking. Of course, not only will yours truly be there, but of course our honored guest today, I believe, will also be there as well. But thank you so much for listening today. In studio, live with us. I'm so thankful that he came in as opposed to calling in. Is our mayor here for Santa Clarita, Jason Gibbs. He was elected to the city council back in November of 2020. I'm pretty sure it's probably because of all those mail-in ballots. And then he is currently serving as mayor because of the iteration of our city council as of this year in 2023. Of course, he's the father of two beautiful children and married to his wonderful wife, Chandra, and they reside right here in the wonderful Santa Clarita Valley. Mayor Gibbs, good to have you here today on Politics in the Pulpit.
Pastor Cook, thank you as always. You know, we got to work on the budget for your program. We could do a better intro. I don't know where you found that low-budget guy to speak. We'll take care of that at a later time.
Yeah, well, Joe's probably listening right now, but
I should hope so.
I just know that he was very cost-effective. That's all. Yeah, very much
Excellent.
so.
Excellent.
I'm glad he did what he did, but yeah, maybe we can get someone with a little higher profile to do it next time. But anyway, first of all, thank you very much, Mayor Gibbs, for being here today.
Of course.
Let's start off with just some basic stuff.
Sure.
How long have you been a resident of our fair city, and what gave you the inclination to jump in to the city council race in 2020?
Sure. So what brought me here was actually my wife, Chandra.
Okay.
And we weren't married at the time, but she had taken a job with Boston Scientific right about the beginning of 2013.
Okay.
And I was still living up on the Central Coast in Orchid, California. And I don't know if you've met my wife, but she is way too beautiful for a person like me, so I knew I couldn't leave her alone too long. So I immediately made it so I could come work remote. So I'm still working up at the launch sites, but I was able to move down here about that time frame, at least part-time. And then we got married in 2014. So that's when we really set up shop permanently together, was 2014. So it's been a little over 9 years now.
Tell me real quick before we get into the political part of it.
I don't do politics.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Then we'll get into the pulpit part of it then. But maybe that's more my bag.
Let's
but
stick to
anyway,
politics.
Exactly. What is it like being dad?
Oh, it's the greatest thing I'll ever do. It's the
Yeah.
greatest thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
You know, I was worried when we first started to have our kids that I'd be one of those dads like, okay, well, when you get older and you're a little more interesting, then maybe I'll pay attention. I loved them as little babies, as infants. Mm-hmm. And this age, you know, the personalities are showing up and they're growing and they're getting a little rebellious and they like to push your buttons a little bit. But when they were little and just learning to walk, they just looked at you with true eyes of endearment and love. And that's what got me to get involved in the community and eventually into politics. Politics was never something I looked to aspire to. I always called myself the window shopper, where I'd read the news, read the headlines, pay attention, and then go on with my day. But having Aiden, I always tell this story because it's true. It's time, just after about September timeframe, about a month or so he was born, I drew the short straw to change diapers in the middle of the night. And I'm sitting there changing diapers, half asleep, and he reached up and he just grabbed my pinky with his hand. And we had a moment, and that was the moment where you realize that your life needs to be more important now. You need to do something for those that depend on you and rely on you. And so I said, well, now I'm going to get involved. And that's literally what jump-started me into getting involved locally. And the other side of that was a friend of mine who ran for city council in San Luis Obispo. He lost that year. So this was the year Aiden was born in 2016. And he called me, and we were chatting, and he said, hey, by the way, it's your turn to run for office. I said, what do you mean it's my turn? He said, well, we had an agreement that if I ever ran for office and I've done my part, you have to. I said, all right. So I went to the city's website, and the first thing that popped up was, do you want to be a city council member? And it was for Dante Acosta's vacancy seat. So I applied along with 50 other people, never been to City Hall, couldn't have told you one single thing about this city other than where McDonald's was and where Coffee Kiosk was, because that's where my life was as an engineer and as kind of a stay-at-home dad working from home and just being with Chandra and the little ones. And few years later in 2020, we just kept at it. met lots of amazing, great people along the way who taught me how to be involved and be effective in this community. And it really ended up not being so much about politics, but about engagement and understanding the people who created Santa Clarita and what they did. And it was all about nonprofits and community. Or as Bob Keller would say, it's mom and apple pie. And the politics side is secondary. It's interesting, but you can't let it get in the way of doing amazing things. And I think Santa Clarita, and it's, gosh, we're pushing 36 years now, and our 36-year history has created one of the best cities in LA County, if not the best, and really is a model for what you can do when you're just here to do good things.
And to think, the city is, 1987, I believe.
1987, December.
And I remember last year at the Republican Gala, Laureen West, showed us that video
Yes.
of the origin of the city and how everything started. It is humbling to be a part of a relatively young city, and it's a wonderful city, and just to think that we're still in Northern California, Northern Los Angeles County is one of those things that's even more humbling to think that we're surviving, though we are still part of LA County.
Yeah.
What do you think of the push of that people have had over the last couple of years to annex Santa Clarita and make us either part of Ventura or maybe even Kern County? Is there any oxygen to that, or what do you think of that, Mayor?
Not so much anymore. I mean, that was the initial push before it even became a city, was we need to be our own county. And I think, if I'm remembering right, I think Carl Boyer wanted to call it Canyon County, if I'm remembering right. And I believe there was 2 different initiatives to do it, and both didn't work. And one of the biggest headaches that you have with it is, even if you as a community vote to separate and be your own county, you have to get approval from the rest of the county to allow for you to leave. And it is just a monumental undertaking. And I think with the amount of wealth that exists here and the amount of money that we give into LA County as a community, I don't know that they'd be all that interested in making it happen. So at the time, even back in the late 80s, we realized that, well, if we can't become our own county, then at least we can be our own city. So we're not driving down, to Norwalk or down into the middle of Los Angeles just to let our voices be heard way up here in, the North Santa Clarita Valley and even farther north. So that's why we became a city. So, I went to my first Contract Cities event recently. I've never been. We're a contract city. We contract services with LA County, with the sheriffs and fire and such. And I'm listening to all of these people who are contract cities, and they're talking about all the great things they're doing in their community, which is wonderful. But I mean, they're saying things like, we're opening our second park. And I'm like, well, we have over 35 parks, I think, now in the city. And they're talking about, hey, we're getting a Starbucks this year. And I was like, well, I think we're getting 3, and we're still getting yelled at about it. And you realize that as a city, we were built on the idea of the LA County was getting in the way. And we know what we need to do to become a successful city and a good city. So we just put our heads down and did it. And we've kind of walled ourselves off mentally. So as I've started to expand and look into the county and see other places and talk to other people, you even realize even more how special Santa Clarita really is and what a great place we are and what we've done. It's truly remarkable.
Shane, are you biased towards this conversation? Do you want to interject something? I mean, you're over here doing your little laser thing over here,
I'm agreeing with everything that's being said. I'm nodding my head. I'm in complete agreement. And
Okay.
I had a similar experience and realization in just 37 years. We have a tremendous amount to offer as a city. I'm only 29 years old. I don't know much, but I know enough to realize.
You're younger than our city.
Yeah, I am, and I'm old enough to realize just how beautiful the facilities that we have, the amenities that we have. Like you're saying, multiple Starbucks, not just one on the corner down the road. So, just not to interject myself into your two's conversation.
Well, you're over here doing your Austin Powers thing.
I'm in agreement. It's a great place to be.
Well, amen, Shane. Well, and that's from the board op guy. So
I like it.
Yeah, I think it's sold. Let me ask you this question,
Sure.
Mayor. What has and what is informing your politics? Obviously, this is supposed to be a nonpartisan position in many ways, but I think you would probably consider yourself probably a little more conservative, at least fiscally in some areas as well. What is informing who Jason Gibbs is in terms of what your thinking is when it comes to the political things?
So it's twofold. I grew up in Santa Barbara, and my dad, I think he and my mom were both very much that traditional Reagan conservative. And, California back in the 60s and 70s, when they really got their start here in California themselves, because they transplanted out of New York and Michigan, California was a very conservative place. It was a very red place. And that change really didn't start happening until you moved into the 90s. But I was still raised in a household where, if you want something, you go out and earn it. My dad grew up in a family, I think it was maybe 4 to 6 kids, mom by himself, no money. And my grandmother, who I never met, told my dad, you need to go to school, you need to do better. So he was the first to go to school in his family. He got an electrical engineering degree, anesthesia, and a degree in medicine, studying anesthesiology. And he was always that example of, if you want something, you just go do it and you make it happen, and you don't depend on other people. People will be there to help you, but they shouldn't be the reason that if you want to pursue something that they have to provide it because it's what you want. And he was like one of those blood, sweat, and tear guys. So he was a guy that came from nothing and did extremely well for himself and was very fortunate. And he instilled a lot of that into us. And I've carried that with me. I think when I started getting politically involved, I really liked listening to Dr. Ron Paul. I'm not nearly as libertarian as I'd say he is. His idea of money policy is, I'm a rocket engineer, and that's still way above my pay grade, what he talked about. But his message always came back to the Constitution and what the freedoms really are. And there were times when government was misused to try to create freedoms that didn't exist or suggest that freedoms only exist for certain people. And he was the one who always came back to that idea of, no, freedoms exist for people. It's not just for a particular group or a particular subset. And that, as I was maturing and growing, that always sat with me. And as I've learned here in Santa Clarita, if you look at our government structure, we're very lean. We've always been a very lean organization. And with that has come tremendous success. You know, the ideologies of things like, you know, you save in the good years so that you have money in the bad years, things like that, has served us extremely well, to the point where this year I think our city budget's about $322 million for the third largest city. We still hold a 20% operating reserve. We still hold AAA ratings. We have $90 million in capital improvement projects that are lined up, from parks and streets to improvements, where other cities, you know, during COVID were laying people off or trying to figure out how to turn the lights on. That's never something we had to do, but it came from those real conservative beliefs of just relax, be smart, reserve your money while you have it, spend it wisely when you get it, don't get over exuberant, and it pays off as time goes on. And I think we're seeing those benefits now.
Well, talking about the benefits, if you're just tuning in today, you're listening to Mayor Jason Gibbs here in Santa Clarita. You're here on Politics in the Pulpit. I did a quick Google search here and found that Smart Asset Survey. I Googled your name, and you won't believe the things that popped up.
Don't go to the second page.
Exactly. I was going to say, the pictures were pretty interesting, though. But anyway,
I was young, I needed the work.
Exactly. The Smart Asset Survey ranks Santa Clarita as the 4th safest place to live, the 8th lowest property crime rate, and the 11th lowest violent crime rate. How proud are you of that?
Extremely.
And how can we get even better than that?
Extremely. And, you know, that comes back to our largest line item in the budget is what we spend for our police force and our sheriff's department. And we've created such an incredible relationship with our sheriff's department. I think this year we spend over $30 million a year contracting those services. And it's because you can't put a price on safety. Mm-hmm. You know, the one thing I get worried about politically, if you will, is there's these big, broader conversations on large social topics that go around the world. Obviously, Pride is a big one this month, and so forth. And all these conversations are important, but they don't matter if you don't have safety, if you don't have clean streets, if you don't feel comfortable going down to the park, if you don't have those mom and apple pie pieces. It doesn't do you any good to have those broader conversations if you're not taking care of things at home, if you're not creating an environment where people feel safe, they feel warm, they feel respected, and feel loved. And that has been, I think, at the root of what's made Santa Clarita the way it is. From supporting our police department, supporting the fire department, supporting our nonprofits. We think we have over 150 nonprofits now in Santa Clarita. Those are the heartbeats. And what I always tell people is the one thing government's really good at is taking money. They're not really good at spending it and overseeing it. So the more government realizes that, and they partner with people who have passion, and they can provide those resources to those who want to put the effort in and limit bureaucracy and increase productivity, I think the better communities are.
Talking about politics and the government not being able to be good at spending money, let me ask you a policy question as it relates to our city. Has inflation impacted the city budget at all over the course of the last couple months? And what financial adjustments will the city need to make going forward?
Of course. You know, we had this discussion kind of over the last few years. You know, CPI, you saw CPI some years as high as 8%. I think this year it was 5%. And if you looked over the last 4 years, you know, we looked at things from seed to oil to fuel. Most of these things were going up on the low end, 60%, going up is 80%, even 100% in some cases. So what that means is the city was required to move more funding into your operational expenses, which at the end of the day decreases what you have available for special programs and CIP. But because of those practices that we've instituted for 30 plus years, we're able to manage that. And we're not immune to it, but we're able to cover it. We're still able to provide the things we want to provide and still have a very elaborate CIP program to come across with it. So it affects everybody. I think it affects other cities much harder who haven't been as fiscally responsible or been able to be fiscally responsible. But because we are, we can say, yeah, these things are happening, but we're still okay. We're still able to manage and move forward.
Title 42 was lifted a few weeks ago. The administration is, of course, bragging that it did not have quite the surge that we anticipated. So I would ask the question, has the immigration surge impacted Santa Clarita in any way? And if so, is it negative or positive? What say you?
Honestly, at our level, we don't get into it. We don't hear much about it. The only two things that have even crossed my desk, we had the Afghan refugees who came over. It's been probably over a year ago now. But our involvement, for me personally, it wasn't at a council level. It was just, there were people who needed help. So we brought, I think with Santa Clarita Grocery, we were able to bring food and some clothing to people who, you think about it, you leave a war-torn country, and the first place you drop is you look out your window and you see roller coasters. I mean, I can't imagine what it would feel like to be that way. But for us, it was, no, there were people here. They were only here temporarily under the federal program. So we provided some food and some clothing, but that wasn't a city issue. And I think the other one, I think Governor Abbott out of Texas was talking about sending, 30, 40 people over here to LA County for the same type of reasons. But no, we typically don't see that at City Council. And quite honestly, Pastor, that's not something you want to see here. That is a truly a federal issue that affects all of us. But if that starts coming into City Hall and people look to City Hall to solve those types of problems, I think they're going to be rudely surprised, because that's not where our role should be. We're interested in it. We want to follow it. If it starts impacting our local communities, we need to be able to address it. But you have to address it by the people who are responsible for those items to be addressing them the way they should be.
Well, thank you, Mayor.
Sure.
When we come back here in just a minute on Politics in the Pulpit, we're going to continue our conversation with Mayor Jason Gibbs. And I want to talk about one of the hot topic issues, at least with the people that I'm talking to, and that has been the recent decision to go from at-large voting to the redistricting process. And so some people have some really hot opinions about that. Some people don't really know what that's all about. So I'm going to ask the mayor about the pros and cons of redistricting and how that works in 2024 when that is implemented. So you're listening to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station. This is AM 1220 and 98.1 FM. We'll see you in just a minute. We are back live here on Politics in the Pulpit, having way too much fun between the breaks here with the mayor of our city. And if you're just tuning in today, you are listening to Pastor Jerry Cook, your holy host. And of course, we have with us today Mayor Jason Gibbs here from the beautiful city of Santa Clarita. And we have been asking about some of the policy procedural things that happen here in our city. Obviously, I'm not a politician. I'm a pastor. But I get to know and rub shoulders with a few of our guys here, and I appreciate that very much. And just on a side note, I appreciate you coming in today, sir, and sitting in as opposed to calling in. I like calling in, but it's always great to be able to interact on a personal level.
And it was nice to get dressed up for you.
No, you did a great job. And by the way, the pastel color is excellent. I appreciate that. For those of you who know the inside joke, the mayor loves his pastel shirts with his navy blue suits.
I do. So more importantly, my wife loves them, so I love them as well.
Well, I'm not going to argue with Chandra on that.
Thank you.
You can. There's no doubt you want to please your wife more than you want to please anybody else. So.
Agreed.
Well, let me talk about this redistricting thing,
Sure.
because obviously there are some passions on both sides of this, and some people think there's a conspiracy behind this particular lawyer that's going around these various cities and basically changing their election laws and how they do elections. Explain what this redistricting thing is first and foremost.
Sure.
And then explain the pros and cons of it, if you would, sir.
Oh. How long we got? 30 minutes?
Do it. It's your time. It's your time.
So this all stems, obviously, here locally. It stems from originally a threat of litigation under the California Voting Rights Act. In short version, basically the CVRA claims that when you have at-large elections the way the city has had since our inception, you offer the ability to dilute minority votes. For example, if the city of Santa Clarita was 80% white, 20% Hispanic, by logic under CVRA, 80% of the white people could counteract 20% of Latino vote, and they would never be able to select the person of their choice. Not something I totally agree with, but that's the premise of CVRA. What has happened with CVRA lawsuits is California basically allowed cities and municipalities, so water boards, school boards, city councils, you can be threatened and basically say, look, we are going to bring litigation against you, saying you need to go to districts. And the law allowed that if you did it within 45 days, then you would just simply change over to districts in your elections. The lawyer who brought the claim would receive a nominal fee. I forget the amount, like $30,000
A
maybe.
nominal fee.
They would receive a fee just for bringing the threat. But the premise was, well, we don't want all these lawsuits running up and down California, and this is a way that someone can bring the lawsuit and move the direction we feel that elections need to go. So the city had been threatened twice. I believe we were originally threatened back in the it was my 12, 13 time frame under a different attorney. And at the time, we fought it, but it was settled. So the case was settled. And what the settlement was is that the city would go from a spring election, so it used to be April elections, to November, to general, with the idea being you would have more voter turnout because it's the November election typically has a higher voter turnout. And two, that we would switch to cumulative voting. And at the time, that was, for example, if you had 2 city council members up for re-election, at the time you could vote for two people to be on council. Well, with cumulative voting, the belief was, well, you could vote for one person twice and cast 2 votes for one person. So even though that was part of the settlement, I believe a judge later came back and said, no, cumulative voting isn't allowed. And it stayed kind of quiet until you moved to 2020 and you had a new lawyer come in, the gentleman out of Walnut Creek, who, again, threatens a lawsuit. And under CVRA, realistically, threats could continue to come. There's nothing to stop it. You have one and you settle, doesn't matter. Another one can come. So this threat came. The city at the time, believe it or not, we actually got, I use the word lucky, but that's not the right word, because of COVID and the governor's order, it actually shut down the clock that started for that 45 days. And so the city stayed to an at-large election again in 2020, and it stayed through the pandemic all the way to 22, but a lawsuit was filed. And it was the decision of the council that we just did not feel under CVRA that there was a course of action for us to take that would show a win. Up to now, only one city has had any success in fighting CVRA, and it was at the appellate level, and that's Santa Monica. At the end of this month, they're finally slated to be heard at the Supreme Court here in California. So we're all very interested to see what's going to happen with it. But aside from that, we did not feel that with the information we had, with everything coming to it, that we had a way of successfully fighting it. I don't believe anyone on the city council supports districts. The city, when we formed, took that question on how we want to be elected, and we want to be elected at large. And I think it has served the city very well. But because of where the lawsuit set up in CVRA, we felt this was the best course of action for the city because the cost of fighting and losing is millions and millions of dollars. And I think Palmdale was one that got hit really hard. I think $6 million comes to mind. Santa Monica, you're probably talking in the 20 millions now because it's been going so long. And for us, we didn't feel that was the right direction to take. I don't think any of us wanted it, but it's where we are.
How will that impact the way you run? Now that you're going to have to pay just close attention to your specific district, and who really cares about the other guy anymore? But instead of having like a feel for the whole city, now it's like you're just like a portion or allocated a portion of it.
You are,
and it just kind of, I don't know, it kind of dislocates you from the rest of the constituency.
It does. What I tell people, for me, and anybody that wants to run for office and wants to serve on this council, yes, methodology has changed. You have to focus on your area in terms of votes. But if that's all you focus on and you don't look at the other 4/5 now of your city, I think we're going to be in real trouble as a city going down the road, because all we have seen, at least in my experience, when I look at like the city of Los Angeles, for example, you create fiefdoms. You create people that feel that this is my box, no one else has any say in it, but no, that's not true, because my vote affects every single person in this city. So what I always tell people is, yes, when it comes to running, you only have a block that votes for you, and that's where your effort and focus needs to go to when it comes to trying to get people to vote and support for you. But when you govern, you have to think from a city standpoint. You have to look at how what you're doing in your area affects everybody else and what's happening in those areas. If we allow the creation of fiefdoms and these bifurcations, I think we would be in real trouble as a city.
It's kind of sad how we have moved so far away from MLK's dream, and now everything is being seen through the lens of race. I mean, everything.
It is.
And it's unfortunate because obviously, we tried to at least up until Obama's election, it seems like everything just kind of switched course, and especially during Trump's tenure, it just really switched hardcore to where everything's being seen through that lens, and now everything's being forced, even though these are the guys that are saying, racism is a lie, blah, 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 and of course racism isn't a lie, there's no doubt about it. But it's just unfortunate that we all have to acquiesce to that certain section that says everything has to be seen through this lens,
Right.
and no other lens counts.
Yeah, what I tell people is race matters, but that's not the only thing you need to look at when you're judging contacts. And when we look at all these elections, my content that what they're claiming is you can dilute the votes of Latinos or the minority population that governs or that has the largest majority in your city, but it's not about the color of somebody or the race of somebody who's getting elected. It's about who is their candidate of choice, who is it that group prefers. And I have a real hard time with the idea that 40% of this population, if it's Latino or African American, only want one type of person. And I struggle with that. I've never believed that, because I think lots of other things come into play. It can be simple things like where you are on the ballot. It can be things like your designation. And then the other part of it is, how do you decide if someone's Hispanic or not? Because sometimes you have people who have a different last name, and they look at the name and say, well, your name is Hispanic, but you may be just as white as myself. And so there's too many absolutes that go in with the idea of race and minorities vote a certain way, the same way that whites vote a certain way, or non-minorities vote a certain way. I've never liked that idea, and I don't think that it's right. I think other things come into play that go far beyond race, but race is probably a component. But as you said, it's become the hyper focus that it is everything. And what I always tell people who are interested in districts, over the years, I've heard less about race, because CVRA is concerned about race, but locally people would say things like, well, 3 of the council members live within a mile of each other, and they can't represent this city very well. I don't have any people, in Canyon Country. I say, well, if that's what you believe, then why did the city just invest tens and tens of millions of dollars into building the Canyon Country Community Center? Why did we invest over $50 million to build a sheriff station in the middle of town, closer to the canyon side, so that it has access to all of the areas? Why do we continue to invest millions of dollars into areas that these council members don't live at? Because they don't look at what's around them as what's important. They look at the city as a whole. And so anytime there was a district discussion, I would always say, you tell me how districts will make the city better, how the governance will be better. And if you can convince me that it's better for the city, then I could get on board. But if all you have to say is things like, well, I don't like too many council members living near each other, or I could have won my election if we were in districts, then I have no use for that argument, because it's not an argument. That's a self-serving decision that you're trying to make, and that's not what's best for the city.
One of the things that was brought up to me over the course of the last few weeks has been this notion that what is the city going to do about all these vendors that are standing on corners, either having full-blown restaurants or something as simple as just selling flowers or some fruit. Now, obviously, like you, hey man, people are trying to make a living. I get it. California is a high rent, high cost property, that whole thing. The fact that we even own homes is a remarkable thing. But there just seems to be an influx of them. In fact, I was just driving down, I think it was Sierra Highway the other day, and I noticed, there was a full-fledged restaurant happening there on the sidewalk, and these guys operate without any kind of health securities, anything of that nature. How can the city crack down, or is there a way to crack down on that?
It's so some you are right, some do, not all, because basically what it was is it was a state law change. State assembly, state government came in and said, you have to allow sidewalk vending, is what they called it. And basically what it said was, they have to have a health permit, and they have to be able to, if you want to have a local permit, you can have one, but it's restricted on what you can allow and not, or what you can disallow. And basically they said, other than that, you have to let them vend. And so we've addressed things like, you can't completely block sidewalks because you have ADA issues. We've addressed things through the municipal code, like you have to be a certain distance away from the drive-ins to commercial centers. But we're very, very restricted on what we can and can't do anymore, because the state decided this is what you need to do. As an example, they could literally go and set up a shop right out here in front of KHTS on Newhall, and if they have their health permit and they have the operational permit, we can't stop them. And there are some, unfortunately, we do have some people who who are trying. They're not trying to be burdens on the rest of the business community. They are just trying to make that living and do what they know. But there are some who operate these huge operations and will come and say, where's your information? And say, oh, we don't have any. Then you're like, okay, well, then you can't operate. No problem. So they shut down, but they come back an hour later. Or there's some who will literally confiscate equipment because they've had over and over violations. They say, no problem, take it. We take it. They're right back there the next day. And unfortunately, it's just this constant, all you can do is just keep going back and enforcing what you're allowed to enforce. And it just becomes this cat and mouse game. You're just constantly chasing over and over again. But there's always that worry. If you stop chasing, if you stop enforcing and doing what you think is right for your community, is when it really starts.
So essentially what you're saying, it's not really not a local issue for us, it's a state issue, and they're kind of hamstringing us.
It's a state issue that became a local issue, but it's limited us on our abilities to do things. And we're going to see the same thing when it comes to developments. The state's going to become very focused on affordable housing. And in a lot of ways, rightfully so. But their way of addressing affordable housing is saying, local communities, you're getting in the way. So we will go to developers, or we'll allow state law that says if you build 100% affordable housing, you get this bonus, this bonus, this bonus. And if you're within 1,000 feet of like a train station, then you don't need to have parking, you don't need to have play space, you don't need to have this. It doesn't go to planning commission, it doesn't go to council. The staff, as long as they're meeting all the state law requirements, the staff can't stop it. So you will start seeing different housing developments, different commercial developments. They're talking about conversions of commercial buildings to residentials in areas that aren't zoned for it. They're claiming, nope, it's we need housing, and local government's kind of getting in the way. It's coming. I mean, it's not a doomsday scenario. It's here. These are real things that we're constantly fighting.
Yeah, and what, if anything, can the city council do to kind of, I don't know, put a pause on some of that, make it go down, kick the can down the road, or is there anything?
You're very limited, right? So you work within the confines of the law. Sometimes there are avenues to say you need to offer X, Y, and Z. We can still require that, but the state's getting good at removing those barriers as well. There's a couple of laws. I think it's SB 4 and SB 420. I think it's SB 423. The same ideas. It's if you're a religious institution and you up there Freedom's Way, you decide you want to build a 100-unit affordable housing piece. Okay, well, you're not zoned for housing. You don't have any space for parking. You don't have any jobs in the area or any amenities. But because it's going to be affordable housing, even though you're not zoned for it, there's law that says, okay, then you can build it, and we can't stop it.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for
I'm
making our day just rosy.
That's what I'm here for.
Well, with that said, what are the future plans, not the state notwithstanding, but what are the future plans for Santa Clarita in terms of new projects, etc.?
Oh, I mean, there's the amount of stuff going on is incredible.
Yeah.
Right. So I talked about just a couple of real highlights. We're going to be approving our fiscal year budget at the next meeting, and I think I said we had $90 million coming in capital improvement projects, and of that, I believe $61 million are all new projects for the new year. The biggest one is we're obviously always focused on parks and open space. So David March Park is finally going to be finished and designed, and we're looking at, I think it's about almost $11 million to completely finish and build out David March to offer the park amenities. Old Orchard, I think, is coming in around 5.5. The ones I'm really excited about is a Blue Cloud Bike Park up in the Haskell Canyon area, because I think this is going to be the first time that the city is going to take amenities that really start attracting more regional draws. And believe it or not, things like Central Park and a lot of our baseball areas and softball areas is one of our biggest attractions. One of the most tourism we get is sports tourism for people doing weekend tournaments. And it's my hope as the city continues to grow up, as they say, that those items that we bring in start attracting regionally are going to be a higher level. So Blue Cloud is designed to be a mountain bike park, I think it's over 100 miles of, was it 100 miles? A lot of miles. How about that? A lot of miles of mountain bike area, but we're also looking at a sanctioned, USA sanctioned BMX piece to go along with it. The same thing that maybe when we start looking at, one day the Burmite property is going to come under consideration when it's clean. The same thing with a lot of these large project areas where developments are coming. Are you going to be able to put pieces in that bring us to that next level?
What about that large piece of, talking about the Burmite property, but over there off of Sand Canyon, and between Sand Canyon and Soledad, there's like a sea of wrecked cars parked there.
Oh, yes. There is.
I think
you see that coming into town,
I
right?
do, and I see it going out of town.
Mm-hmm.
So explain that to people that are like, man, that just popped up in the last few months. What's going on?
That's in the county.
You have 1 minute and 50 seconds to do it.
Yeah, I needed 2 seconds. It's in the county.
It's in the county.
I believe it's kind of like a salvage auction service,
Yeah.
where they bring cars, and that's just where they're stored. But it's in the county.
Because every time I go down, it seems like it expands more and more. The evolution of this thing
Sure.
just gets bigger and bigger. I'm like, man, how much more of that canyon are they going to take over?
Your guess is as good as mine on that one.
It's great knowing that our mayor is so affable and able to do some things here in this city. But anyway, well, when we come back here on Politics in the Pulpit, we'll wrap things up with our mayor, who is obviously very helpful for us here, and we'll see what else we can trip him up with if we can here on Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station. Back here for our final segment on Politics and the Pulpit, and if you are listening in, we are here with Mayor Jason Gibbs, who of course has basically told us he's completely powerless over the city. But
thank you, Pastor Cook.
but regardless of all that, I wanted to ask you if you could just look into your crystal ball of prophecy, do you have any future aspirations beyond the city council?
No, do you?
No, I don't think I'd be good there.
No, I never had, honestly, I never had aspirations for city council. I had an aspiration that came for service after having children. But, people often forget, serving as mayor is an absolute incredible honor. It really is. And being on the council, I still am awed at that idea sometimes, especially in the third largest city. And to say that you're the mayor of a city that represents almost 230,000 people it's really incredible, and it kind of takes your breath away. But at the same time, I'm raising 2 young children. I still work full time. I'm still in the rocket engineering world, and I still do that. So I'll be heading out to Cape Canaveral.
I'm sitting next to a rocket scientist.
I say rocket engineer, but I can't correct everybody all the time.
Okay. Finally, you can make some sort of correction. This
There you
is
go.
good.
There you
This
go.
is good.
I got a correction for you.
That's good. So
to do anything higher would take me away from that, and I don't know that that's something I would do. And I think I've told you this before. My wife is completely apolitical, has no interest in politics, never fully understood really why I got into it. She knows it's for good reasons, but it's not her world. And so she stays out of it. She'll come to a couple of events, and she's kind of like the queen. And, I'll tell you a funny, real quick story. We did the grand reopening of Chuck E. Cheese. And I said, Sean, why
on Old Road?
Yeah, on Old Road. And I said, of course we'll go. Sean, do you want to bring the kids? She said, that sounds great. So we came, and we get there, and the gentleman who greets us says, I'm sorry, who are you? I said, well, I'm Jason Gibbs. I'm the mayor, and this is my wife and kids. And he says, oh, the mayor's here. He turns around and goes, hear ye, the mayor and the first lady of Santa Clarita. I thought my wife was going to leave. She saw it. He called me. What? I thought she was going to take the kids and get out. Not her scene.
I think my wife would probably like being called the first lady. But anyway, I don't know. I'll ask Rita when I get home. Another question.
Sure.
Just not policy, just personal.
Oh.
Do all of the council members get along?
I think so.
Think so?
I mean, I think with any good family, as they say, there's always those little tiffs.
Internal squabbles?
Yeah, but I mean, the overall realization of what is believed to be good for the city, I think has been fairly aligned almost since our inception. Earlier days, if you look back, there was a lot of 3-2 votes, but there's a lot of 5-0s, occasional 4-1s. And it's not because we all get in a room together to violate laws and say, hey, what are we going to do? It's because we all have that same belief. And I think the city manager plays that very well. He knows what the council's interested in, the 2025 plan, what we want to fight for, what we look for in our budgets and what we look for in projects. And that's what gets brought forward. We don't bring forward a lot of contentious things. We bring forward very positive community-based items. Mm-hmm. So it's very rare that you see any hard dissension. And some people thought maybe Hart Park would be one. That's really a huge one that's gone a little quiet. Is that we're starting the process of transitioning Hart Park from the county to the city, and there was some concern with that. On is that good for the city? Can the city's budget handle it? Is this what's right for Hart's legacy and Hart's will? And at the end of the day, there was discussion, not a lot of heated discussion, but there was definitely some opinions. But at the end of the day, it still came back 5-0, and I think the majority of the council would wake up the next day and say, this is going to be something incredible that we have for this community. It's the last county park in our city boundaries that'll now become part of the city.
That is amazing. And let me just ask you also real quickly here before we kind of round out the program. I know that you threw out the first pitch.
I did.
For the Dodgers the other day. And we had some people that said, you got to ask the mayor this question. What are your thoughts, Mayor Gibbs, on the Dodgers inviting, then disinviting, then reinviting the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence and all full disclosure, obviously, I'm not a Catholic.
Yeah, I went to Catholic school.
And I I don't believe in nuns, but obviously this is a group that would ostensibly be kind of anti-Catholic in a lot of ways. They're disrespectful to them. I did see when an hour before the Giants game and the Dodgers, they honored them with whatever they honored them with. And I think it was virtually an empty stadium, and then I think there was. What is maximum occupancy at Dodgers? Like 67,000?
It's up there.
Okay, and I think there was I think that game had about 49,000 people there, so it wasn't full, wasn't capacity, but obviously there was a push by the Catholic League for them not to, a lot of Catholics to not attend that,
right,
to not attend that first game. But what were your thoughts? Do you think the Dodgers made a mistake there by injecting some sort of culture politics into the situation?
Well, I think operationally they didn't help themselves by inviting, disinviting, and reinviting. So they already got off kind of on the wrong step there. For me personally, it's funny. I didn't even know this was a thing when it first happened because I had posted about Santa Clarita Dodger Day, and I started getting Facebook messages about you need to boycott.
I read that,
and I was the guy who came back and said, "Boycott what? Does nobody wants to see me throw the ball? Am I that bad? I didn't think I was." And so someone gave me some information about what you're talking about. And so before jumping on it, I went and looked into this group to see what it is they believe. And from what I learned was, they were built on the idea of we're trying to bring awareness to the community that was suffering from AIDS and HIV at a prolific rate, who believed at the time that the Catholic Church was not there for them. But for them to take the most two sacred images really of Catholicism, of both nuns and Jesus, I thought was beyond inappropriate. And they call it satire. I call it crossing a line, because to infringe on a religion's most idolic component.
Yeah.
The idea that it is Jesus, and you probably know this, I don't know if you know too much about him, but Jesus was the idea of perfection, really about the Son of God on earth. And this group decided it's okay to mock them because they felt that the church was against them and their people. That was a line for me. I can understand why they would have been upset with the Catholic Church, and if all that was true, why they would have a problem with the church's stance. But at the same time, you're not doing any favors, and I think they were completely in the wrong to take those two figures that is so important to hundreds of millions of people in this world, and to use that as a form of satire. I think the country would be better to realize there are some things you leave alone. You wouldn't touch any of the Indian idols. You wouldn't touch Muslim idols or Islam idols. But to touch the Catholicism idols and touch Christianity idols and to be comfortable with it, to me, it says something about a group of people that's comfortable doing that.
What are your quick thoughts on just the whole corporation hijinks with Target, Kohl's, North Face, all of them just going full bore on the whole Pride Month thing?
I think at the end of the day, corporations always look at the bottom line. And if they really feel that taking these active roles in these social items is a benefit to them, in whether it's financially or socially, I think that's a reason a lot of them do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know that a lot of them do it because they really feel those communities are disenfranchised or that they're hurt. Some I'd like to think do. But it's gotten to a point where I think a lot of people don't understand it anymore. It's the same idea when people discuss equity in government. No one even knows what the word means anymore. It means something else to different people, the same way that pride means something else to different people. For some people, pride is recognizing the disenfranchisement and those who have suffered because of their sexuality. For others, it's trying to get the societal stigma to say being any one of these things, it needs to be accepted, and there is no grounds to not be accepted. For others, it's marketing. I don't know. It means something different to everybody.
Last 1 minute, Mayor Gibbs.
All right, I got you.
This is the last question.
Okay.
Has Pastor Cook and Freedom's Way Baptist Church made an impact that's positive for the city of Santa Clarita?
Yeah, you've been picking on the mayor's shirt a lot. I'm not sure that's good.
I'm just glad it's not pastel today.
But I've been to a number of your services now. And we've talked about this. I grew up as a Presbyterian in a Presbyterian church. My Protestant grandmother. To this day, I still don't know what that means. And I went to Catholic school, and I married a Jehovah's Witness, and one of my best friends was Mormon. So I've had all these different branches, if you will, into different versions of Christianity.
A buffet, if you will.
A buffet. Yours is one of the more entertaining, because while I believe your piety is extremely sincere in what you believe in your faith, I appreciate that the most about you, because your faith is unwavering and it's committed to doctrine that you believe in wholeheartedly, and I respect that to no end. But the fact that you can do it with little quips and some humor and make it enjoyable and sing every once in a while, I think that makes what you have going a special place.
My philosophy, Mayor, is it's best to allow the sheep to laugh because they're not noticing they're being shorn. Well, pretty deep, huh?
That little bit. Step back.
I'm just saying. That, I mean, they're not noticing
sheep.
that. Yeah, that's it. I'm just giving you the biblical connotation.
I appreciate that.
Well, anyway, if you listen in today to the mayor, you just found out a couple things that, well, we can't do much in Santa Clarita. But other than that, we're so glad to have Mayor with us today. We're hopefully going to have him back. And Mayor, thank you very much for joining us today on Politics in the Pulpit.
My pleasure. It's the least I can do, according to you.
Okay. We'll check you guys back at the hometown station next Wednesday. Take care.